I just want to preface this by saying, I've covered television and video advertising for over 40 years now. When I started Adweek covering this thing called television, there were 3 television networks in the national market. There were 200 brands. By the end of the 80s, I was at Advertising Age, media editor. Because of cable and satellite TV, there were 4,000 brands using the medium, and today there's about 12 million. So, on that note, I'd like to open up the conversation. We have, to my immediate left, we have Dave Kersey, who's with GSD&M, one of the great powerhouse agencies, part of the Omnicom group, and based in Austin, which is an awesome city. And then we have Grisaldo, who's with Sazerac, one of my favorite cocktails, but also a wonderful spirits company, has some of the best bourbons in the world. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in Tennessee, but...
We appreciate it.
Okay. And we're going to hash it out. So you have a client perspective, an agency perspective. And I'd just like to open up, do you think it's broken? And if so, what parts of it are?
Broken's such a harsh word. Yeah, I do think it's broken. I think we had a lot to do with it, too. As brands, as agencies, as media partners, we knew that this was coming because technology is advancing. So, the 4 networks, it was a radio station, then it was TV, then it was cable, then the internet came, and we knew that this was coming, and we started to silo everything and putting things in buckets and not really look at it as holistically. And I think that was kind of where we started to really separate everything out, when we should have really started looking, how is it all working together? How is linear TV, CTV, cable, how are we reaching our consumers? How are our brands being seen through these different mediums? And then you have social. And we can't treat social like we treat video. It's very different. Our consumers look at it differently. They interact with it differently. They've taken ownership of it. So as brands, and I'll say that because I've been on the brand side for quite a while now, we really have to take ownership of that and say, okay, if we knew this was coming, how did we not get in front of it? How do we get in front of it now? How do we take the time to really understand that?
I agree. Brands are to blame for it being broken. No, I'm kidding. But it is broken. I think we can all...
Not your company's brands. So.
I said
not
brands.
Our company's
I
brand.
said brands and media.
It is broken. We can all agree to that. I think it's the race to the bottom. If you're looking at efficiencies, it's the lack of integration across platforms and services. Why is social rising so fast? It's authentic content. It is what consumers actually want to engage with, and they're not being forced to watch a number of ads at high frequencies. And so to your point, I think we've all kind of done this to ourselves. We've created this, and I think it's been a long time for us to figure out how to make it better. I don't know if it's completely fixable with the advancement of technology, not knowing what's happening in 2 to 5 years, but we can get closer.
I mean, sometimes I really feel for both of you on the agency and the client side, because the world has gotten so complex, I don't even know where you start. But the other layer in fragmentation here isn't just a number of distributors, it's a number of units. I mean, we've jammed so many commercial avails into every opportunity. So this morning, we report on one of Brian Weezer's forecasts, and he predicts that through 2027, the supply of U.S. TV advertising inventory will plummet about 25%. And his rationale was because of the shift from linear to CTV type and streaming experiences, that they have lighter ad loads. But how long is that going to last?
Well, it's not sustainable. It's not the business model. That's not how you're going to drive revenue to create new content for viewers to come back to your platforms. I think ultimately it comes down to transparency and giving us the access to the information of what we're buying, when we're buying it, what audiences. I think Dave said it best yesterday around transparency. And as on the agency side, we're buying segments, right? We're creating these really beautiful strategic audience segments philosophically, and then when you push them into platforms, it doesn't look the same because you are buying lookalikes. You're buying these segments that, to his point, we're not 100% sure who's in that segment or how those were formed, but we're still buying them. And so we're creating this ecosystem where we're showing content to potentially the wrong audiences. And when now you have limited space and availability to do so, you're either reaching the wrong audience, turning them off to your brand, driving incredibly high frequency. So platforms have to find a better way. And the monetization is just a whole nother thing.
Yeah, so Dave put out a Bill of Rights. We published it a few weeks back after his salon. It's very nice. It's a little idealistic, but maybe we actually need some rules, some self-regulation, some industry standards. I know nobody likes self-regulation, but I think people hate, government regulations. Do you think it's time that the industry develop a quota for this? I mean,
I think we do. I think even on the brand side, I think transparency is key with all our partners. I think somebody mentioned it yesterday, and it's like the client will just tell you, oh, they shifted money. We as brands need to be more cautious of that, because not giving the information, not being transparent, and bring all your partners into a room and saying, Caroline said it best, here are the business goals. These are our business goals. These are how they're going to translate to marketing goals. These are how we see them translating to media goals. Then it takes our media partners to look at that and say, well, that's not really a media goal. That's not really something we can sustain. So as a brand, we know the business goals. Like, I report to my CMO. She has our CEO she reports to. So those are the kind of things, like, we have to make sure that we are as transparent as possible. Because you never know. When you're in a room and you have all your partners in a room, even if it's for that first conversation, what can come out of it? What can you really see? And how we get in front of and get better plans and get better, as we're looking at the video model, how do we fix it?
Yeah, we do need marketplace standardization. I mean, it has to start there. On the agency side, we are mired down with evaluating hundreds of partners, often selling the same inventory, reaching the same audiences within the same TV screens or devices. And we're not putting enough time into asking these questions. And I think Caroline said it yesterday in her presentation around what are the business goals? What are we trying to solve as an organization collectively? Because what's happened is the model is brands have information. They give agencies limited information. We go to market with the limited information we have to try to do the best we can, using the funnel, using all of the marketing things to say, here's, based on what you told us, here's how we can achieve X, Y, and Z. Probably can't measure it accurately because that's a whole nother problem. But we don't really know what their ultimate goal is. We don't know where other market pressure is. What's the consumer experiencing broadly? And that's just on the brand agency marketplace side. But when we look at standardization across publishers and just the industry, we're trying to compare partners apples to apples, and no one is doing the same thing. Everyone's using different models, currencies, formulas, and we have to figure out what's the best solution, and it takes time, it takes resources, and at the end of the day, we have to deliver on whatever KPI or objective the client's given us.
So I didn't think we'd get into a regulatory theme, but I think other than the NFL, there is no inventory cap on any video inventory. I don't know if that's contractually regulated. And recently, the Association of National Advertisers put out a call to get rid of MFAs, made for advertising sites. And one of the reasons is because they clutter up their inventory. There are other reasons too. So that's an industry standard. But do you think that this needs to be an industry standard reset for the supply of video inventory?
100%. We need that. I think brands and agencies should demand it. Again, what Caroline was saying is, how do you get all of the right partners in a room and say, let's figure it out. What's the best solution to achieve what we're trying to do? And until we have standardization, we as agencies have to force that integration and force that, I guess, unique or custom solution for your client, when it could be easier and simpler for the entire industry if we had standardization.
And I think as brands, we have to push it too. We have to push our agency partners and say, we need this. we need some kind of, because even if you move business from business, every agency performs differently. Every agency looks at things differently. Again, currency is looked differently at every agency, and it's like, even on the brand side, it's like, then you're like dictating, no, this is how we expect you to do this. This is what we want you to do. And some agencies are like, no, that's not how we work. And then you have this kind of divide between the client, oh, they're being a difficult client. And it's like, no, we want to make sure we're sticking to how we've set up our business objectives. So I think as an industry, we start to standardize the way we look at the currency, and anything we can do to standardize everything, it'll make it a lot easier for everyone, even sellers, I think, at the end of the day.
And what we get a lot of is, POVs from one person's perspective. So our clients will say, and they start losing trust in some of the platforms. Hulu's a great example. And then they start losing trust in the agency because we're putting forward these recommendations. But our clients will say, well, I'm seeing these ads. I'm not in the demographic. No one in my household's in the demographic. So why am I getting these? There's a lot of answers to that, although we're not the ones that placed it. We don't really know, but we can make some assumptions. I personally, within Hulu, I stopped watching Hulu because I get Spanish language Honda ads at an incredibly high frequency. I also get a number of medications for 65 plus year olds, which not there yet, but at a really high frequency, and I'm not getting any ads that are actually representing who I am, my behaviors, or anything like that. Clients are seeing the same thing. They're skeptical. So when we bring plans forward and we don't have the standardization, we're making assumptions based on the data we have.
They're establishing their brand preference for you early because
Long tail
So,
branding.
we talked a lot about holistic planning and comms planning in the prep call, and I'm just wondering if that's not part of the solution here, because I think sometimes we look at these things in buckets and silos that don't make sense. So even Brian Weezer's stat I just cited, that's just for linear and CTV. It doesn't include the fact that Tractor Supply is on TikTok vertical videos now, and that's how the consumer is really experiencing all that. So is the solution a planning one? Should we be thinking differently about this?
I 100% think so, and that's how we approach it. Audience first, building out a consumer journey and an ecosystem based on their behavior. Goes back to we can build these really strategic audience segments or this profile. It's how do we activate those in real time in market. But part of why I joined GSD&M is we are full service. We have the creative brains, we have the strategic brains, the media, coming from media agencies where you are briefed by media clients, you are only given direction on media, you have very limited exposure to what's happening on the creative side, what they're developing content for or who they're developing it for. And so that's broken. Performance comes down to media's placement. If performance is good, it's creative's benefit. So we're always losing. But now that we have everything together at where I'm at, we're able to look at things more holistically and really understand what is a consumer we're trying to convert or communicate with or engage. How are they consuming? What do they care about? And how do we create unique content for them? A lot of what Kimberly was saying with Tractor Supply Company, because they're on social. They're blocking ads at a rapid pace. Gen Z, 70% blocking ads. How do we get in front of them? We have to speak to them the way they want to engage.
And then, from the brand side, I said it yesterday, having these, being able to walk into my creative director's office and say, hey, I know you're going to go fill the TV spot this week. We're not going to run that TV spot on social, just so you know. So don't come back to just one creative. I go, do we need to have a conversation? Do we need to talk with finance and say, the same TV spot that you're bringing back is not going to work across all the channels. It's not going to work across all our targeting. It's not going to work across everything. And I know it's a money thing. It's a financial thing. As on the brand side, trust me, the pie's only so big, and I go and fight for money all the time. And I know a creative team, I know the product team does the same thing. But we have to be conscious that it all plays together. And then it's not siloing everything. So when you're putting together a media strategy and you're thinking, oh, well, the king of this is going to be our linear TV, it's not that anymore. It's how do we have the conversations with our counterparts that are on the SEO side, that is the social manager that runs organic and is doing paid, the conversation with SEM, how is this a video campaign, talking about Jennifer Aniston yesterday, are we bidding on those terms? Are we bidding on Jennifer Aniston's, fitness program? are we making sure that we're putting that on top? You know, at Sazerac, we can't do SEM just because of the nature of alcohol. But one of my previous roles was at a tax company, and we made sure we sponsored a bowl game. We made sure that on these days, you know, taxes and bowl games was one of the search terms. But it was a conversation. You know, I've worked with very smart people in other channels, and I've brought them my media strategy and said, this is what we're looking at. How do we enhance it? How do we work with the other channels to make sure? How do we work with our agency partners? How do we work with our vendors to make sure this is all not being siloed? And, you know, like having those conversations. I think we've stopped having the conversations, like really just having the conversation about how it works together. Not that it's how it's broken, how is it working together? How do we make it move forward together?
If you could get Jennifer Aniston to drink Buffalo Trace, yeah. So do you think technology could be the solution? We also reported today that ComScore did a deal with the Trade Desk to begin a new kind of political targeting through AI and stuff. And is it possible that these currency suppliers can be a solution? We now have new forms of currency that measure the attention or engagement to video advertising. I know there's no standardized common denominator yet for that, but are those possible solutions to weed out the inventory for you and make sure you're reaching the consumer?
Ultimately, yes. I think it comes down to, again, standardization of figuring out what is that baseline. But however we can get smarter and connecting with the right audiences with the right content, the better. So if it's through attention partners, I know there's a number of currency partners, which is more of just getting into market and how you're evaluating performance, but it's truly matching your content with the right audience. So if we can get closer and we can drive performance, to me it's less about high reach, high frequency, depending on the client goals and objectives and where the brand sits in someone's mindset. And it's more about the right connections and the right next step, right? Bringing them through that journey versus just trying to buy everyone and then hope, you know, they're gonna walk into your store, buy your product, go to your website, because it's a waste, right? It's really inefficient, it's driving frequency, it's creating meaningless relationships with people that will never convert into your brand. So yeah, if technology can help us get there closer with standards and guidelines in place, then I think that's gonna help everyone.
Yes and no. I'm a yes and no kind of person on the technology. I think it will help, but I don't know if it'll cause more problems at the end, because we have a lot of technology right now, and we still can't make it work. You know, I've matured into this business, so I remember being a junior buyer and working off of Nielsen and, you know, working on a local market and be like, wait, this is doing a 40 rating? This is awesome. I can buy this 5 times a week and I'm done. And now it's like, you know, you look at impressions, you're looking at Nielsen, you're looking at ComScore, you're looking at any of these currencies. It's like I think we have a lot of resources at our fingertips. Again, I think it's consistency. What are we consistently looking at? Is it like for a brand like a Sazerac, if you're a Fireball consumer, thank you, I appreciate that. But it's pretty much anybody in the room. But if you're a Buffalo Trace consumer, it's a very different mindset. It's a very different target audience. They're mature. They like certain alcohol brands. They're willing to spend on it. You know, I think we have it at our fingertips. We just have to figure out the consistency and how do we use it. I think just adding more is like adding more fuel to the fire.
So we have some time for questions if anyone has any. What do you think is broken? So in our conversation, we also talked about, you know, how maybe we need to flip the funnel. Maybe we just need to shift from these brand metrics more into performance metrics, you know, about, you know, bottom line results, and that's the right way to see what's working, what's not. Do you agree that we should, I mean, it seems like an industry trend, the shift from brand building to...
Yes and no. I think it's certainly easier to go to performance where you have overnight response to your marketing, but then you start losing some of the new audiences, some of that reach and growth if you're not looking at branding. I think you need to have both. But to the points made yesterday, it's aligning to the business objectives, not a media KPI, because that's only going to get you so far. But if we're trying to understand, we're trying to drive people into a store, into a brick and mortar, we're trying to get them to take an action, we can build on that. If we're trying to hit a GRP goal or a certain click-through, which I don't know why people still use click-through, then we're building something that's actually not driving business performance, it's driving our media investment performance to say, check mark, we did a good job, versus how did it really impact the business? Because ultimately, we're all in service of the brand, right? We're not in service of our agency or publishers. It's, we need a brand to do X. How do we all work together to make that happen? So I think performance is part of it, but I think performance can be broader than just last click attribution or sales or conversion. It's really performance of moving a consumer from first exposure, second exposure into the ecosystem all the way through to whatever action it is.
And I think performance, brand is part of the performance. It should be a KPI. It isn't a standalone. So when you're putting together a strategy, your video can do both, you know, but you have to go in with that thinking. Like this part of the campaign is going to drive our brand. This is what we're gonna do. This is a goal for this part of the brand campaign. And then this is the performance part of it. And starting to look at certain channels as, you know, performance, and looking at sub-channels and looking at how they're layering into it all together, because I really do think all media is performance at this point, you know, no matter how you look at it. I know in the past we've taken the approach of shifting away from an upfront model to DRTV because we knew we had a brand campaign, which was our partnerships that we developed up early on. And then we're like, well, we're going to shift this. We're going to turn this into DRTV. And we used iSpot and really looked, and we knew, you know, it's close enough to give us results so that we can drive business decisions, that it made it, you know, we could tell our agency partners that. We're like, this is a, you know, we gave them full access to iSpot. We're like, you guys have a seat at the table. You can see how much you're spending. You know what your CPAs are coming in at. You know what my CPA goal is for you. So if I come back and tell you this isn't working, there is no surprise.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? And I do want to say I stand corrected first that I realize video is broken.
Especially now.
I tend to be the
We
glass half
converted
full
one.
person, but thank
converted
you
one.
all for contradicting me up there.
Hi, I'm Michaela Schwartz. I'm from Marketing Doctor. So I connected a lot with what you were saying about working with, as an agency, just in the media realm, and now being with a full service where you have more access to the sort of full spectrum of what's happening. And I guess I'm asking both of you, who do you think, in terms of roles, who needs to have a seat at that table at the onset of these conversations? Because it's like there is such a thing as too many people at the table. I'm constantly in this chicken and egg of, is it media first? Is it creative first? It's always audience first, but what's the next step? And then simultaneous parallel path timelines, and better do it quickly. And I always come back to who is first invited to that table, and who really should have a space there.
I don't think there's one answer to that, because it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and how your organization's set up. But we like to have a media lead, a senior media lead, a strategy lead, and a creative lead at the briefing table, regardless of the assignment. So we have a number of creative-only clients. I still have my team sit in so we can understand audience and build really specific and customized audience segmentation that we then work with strategy and creative teams to implement into their internal briefing process. So there is a point where there's too many, but if you have the right senior people and you can keep it very condensed, it probably makes the most sense. And we have the benefit, because we are full service, it's easier to pull people in when we need to. But I would say for any brand that's working with multiple agencies, it goes back to the transparency piece. Bring them together. They're all in service of the same outcome. So if you're briefing one agency, the other should hear it. So when they're building whatever they're tasked to do, they know what's in mind, right? They know what you're building towards. In a previous role, my media client would brief us millions and millions of dollars. We would buy a number of audience segments. They didn't interact with their creative counterparts internally. We had no access to the creative agency or creative clients. The messaging did not work for what we were buying. It was a huge miss, a lot of wasted investment. And we had to pivot quickly after we realized, again, it goes back to if media is not performing, it's media agency. If it is performing, it's the creative messaging. But I would say the more senior people that are touching your business that you hold accountable and trust for your business, keep them in the briefing room.
And I'll tell you from the brand side, when I send out the invite, I tell them to send it to anybody who's coming. I go, give me a list and why they need to be here. And if I start reading it, it's like, oh, they're so-and-so. No. I need to know if they're actively on my piece of business. Because, again, you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. And you want the people who are going to be, whether it's a media partner, whether it's the agency, I love meeting your president. Don't get me wrong. I love having that one-on-one relationship. But if they're not the one making the decisions at the end of the day, I don't want them in this meeting wasting 2 hours of their time when they could be working on something else. I want the guy or the girl who's going to sit there and I'm going to email and say, we messed up. How are we going to fix this? That's who I want. So, and I always say, I don't mind having the junior staff because I know that's who's working on my business. From our side, I will always bring the people that are going to work with you. I'll always bring the creative director because I think you need to know who our creative team is and who's going to be where you're going to see like, oh, well, we don't have that piece of creative. This is why I don't. And I want them to see, this is why I need you here. This is why I need, and I think it's very much understanding what your role plays. Because if you're not working on the piece of business and it's only for show, for a client, don't bring them. Don't bring them. And on the vendor side, same thing. I can meet your president once, I'm good. But if you're the one that's gonna handle my business, I wanna talk to you.
All right. Well, actually, we're going to have to cut it here, Joe. Do you have another question?
I was just going to say, I'm glad we didn't fix it because we'd have nothing to say in Scottsdale. But.
Then that I will let you say. You guys have been awesome, and also Dave and Griselda will be leading roundtables later, so if you have more questions for them, so give them all a big round of applause.